Welcome back to the second class, the second half of the Akshi Upanishad, at least in this period of time, where we've picked it up after several months of absence from teaching it in Portland because of the travel restrictions on us lately. We hope to get back to Portland in May for some retreat and teachings. Hopefully by then things will have gotten better. But in the meantime, we're just at home here, broadcasting from our Big Island Center and trying to get some closure on an Upanishad that probably never can be closed because it's just limitless. As you can probably tell from even the first half of this class, that when you get to these high states of yoga, or what we're beginning to call right now Jivan Mukta, there is actually a lot to say about them. Maybe looking back more than looking forward anymore. You can't look forward anymore because you've arrived when you've reached the sixth state called Jivan Mukta, or sort of like arriving at pure meditation, the seventh limb of yoga, and into samadhi. So whatever the case may be, the real import of the whole thing is that maybe you can look back and compare earlier states, probably for the benefit of students and people who are working at those levels. Great teachers always have a mind for that. But to reorient us after our break, we are looking at slokas 37, 38, and 39 in the Akshi Upanishad, and trying to understand what the liberated in life expression really means, and who's qualified for it, and what qualifies them for it. Because we meet so few people who even have that as a goal, maybe don't even know it as a possibility, have no inkling of higher states of awareness. For instance, the waking state is it to them, and probably can look at most of the world as them thinking that the world is real and the waking state's the only thing really happening there, without knowing that these outer states come from inner heavens, kingdom of heaven within you, if you even want to put it that way. Whereas we know in India, the Indian philosophies are based in lokas, and so lokas also means akashas. So we have a few precious words in Sanskrit language to describe to us the subtlety of inner worlds and who we are there. We just went through all of this. Who Gaudapada says you are at each level of your consciousness, and what the location is, what mechanism you're using. It's really brilliant. And this is just in a commentary, not actually in an Upanishad. It's in his study of the Mandukya Upanishad, which is 12 slokas long. Look how much came out in a commentary by him. And he had to be a supreme Advaitist, Advaita Vedantist, or non-dualist, to be able to think that deeply and bring out facets of it. And we know there are certain beings like Jivan Muktas and also Avadutas, in this case that I'm about to sing about, because I didn't get to any of the musical descriptions of some of this beautiful knowledge, wisdom, truth, if you want to call it. But they do sing about it, and it's very beautiful when they do. Stanatrayam yadichane tikatam turyam kalatrayam yadichane tikatam dishascha shantam padam hi paramam paramartha tattvam Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham Gyanamritam samarasam gaganopamoham. In a 40-verse Chalisa that's taken out of the Avadhuta Gita, a fine non-dual scripture, he sings about the four states of awareness in his own unique way by saying, I do not know of a fourth state when the first three are already non-existent to me. the 4, 8, and 16 directions, like inner, outer, up, down, surely cannot exist when the 3 phases of time, past, present, and future, are seen to be unreal. Throughout all for me, Brahman alone is the supreme abode. Therefore I know that I am pure existence, wisdom and bliss, as boundless as the sky, infinite like space. So a good description of what it would be like to have already arrived at the 8th limb of yoga, the 6th stage of Vedanta's Akshi Upanishad, and the nirvana of Buddhism, and the Sampragyata of Patanjali, and so forth. That is well put, and he's already admitting that the stages he went through fell away, and they were just like sort of lines of demarcation that could only last only so long as a line drawn on water, which is a nice way in which Ramakrishna put it. You draw with your finger a line on water. For a split second, it seems like there's 2. Then water just becomes water and erases that line, and you realize it's always one, no matter the appearance of things. You might say it's the ego that's getting in there and drawing that line on water. Or maybe the right people, because another time he said if you put a stick across that water, it seems like it stays too. You've got a boundary that'll persist there for a while. So that would be a person who hasn't reached a higher stage of yoga yet, or a higher limb of yoga, and is still caught down there at the levels of duality, maybe even in qualified non-duality. Vishishta Advaita it's called. Or maybe the dharma is making sense to them, but the non-dual truth is still a far cry. So they're cutting their teeth again in this lifetime. Like Sri Krishna is saying, they pick up the thread of their yoga in the next lifetime. He says this in answer to Arjuna's worry when he questions him in the Gita, what happens to a soul that cannot reach this yoga, this highest state? Isn't he just pulled apart like a rent cloud in the sky? Well, how about consciously dissolving a mind like the fragments of an autumnal cloud instead? So don't let Maya pull you apart. Use your own intelligence to dissolve. And then you're at the behest of this, you see. And that's self-realization. You're doing it in the Atman, by the Atman, for the Atman, because of the Atman. It's Atman all around, or Atma Brahma. So Avatud says that very nicely about just as you would dissolve the tattvas on the way in, or dissolve the stages of yoga, or dissolve the limbs of yoga, you're probably dissolving waking, dreaming, and deep sleep finally, and for all time, back into Turiya. Turiya, what kind of a word is that? It's a number. It's just called the 4th. So the Advaitas, like other very careful beings who did not like to name reality or give it a form, some religions are more like that than others. So those Advaitas were somewhat like that too. They said, we don't want to confuse this at all. We just want to call it the 4th. You're well aware of your waking and dreaming states. We hope you become aware of your deep sleep state, which is a key to everything. But when you get there, beyond the 3 states of awareness, we're just going to call it the 4th to make it simple for you. But he's saying here that basically I don't even recognize the 4th anymore. When you arrive at it, it just dissolves away. So that leaves us where? Still examining the 6th stage, because next week is our final class. We'll conclude the Akshi Upanishad, it looks like, and there we'll concentrate on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 slokas of the 7th stage of yoga, according to the sun god, as reported by Samkriti, the great rishi, who went to have darshan of him inside, found him. So where do we want to go here? I think okay, well, sound.
I can hear it, but
All right. So yes, we lost our internet actually to break everyone, and now we're having a little microphone in and out. So I hope you heard all of that. But where I was going with it all and where I had arrived is we'll look at the seventh stage of the Akshi Upanishads yoga next week at our final class. Hope you're all there to finish up this Akshi Upanishad study of several years with us. But looking deeply at each of those 6 stages, we come upon this actionless, this idea of actionlessness. So I wanted to show you in a kind of contrast to the 4 yogas, that if you take 2 of these, called action and inaction, we know them by the names of karma yoga and raja yoga, or dhyan yoga, or buddhi yoga. I mean, pretty much any of those will define the wisdom yoga for you. We know there's 4 great yogas in that sense, but 2 of them are often not only pitted against one another, but also looked as sort of opposites that can never meet. But these slokas that we've been reading have all been about looking on the same world at one moment and seeing it as Maya, and then the next moment, as it were, from an enlightened state, seeing it as Brahman. So that's a very subtle change of view that happens. That has actually been very nicely described there as the locale shifts and your medium shift, your state of awareness shifts. I mean, that's why this chart was put up there so beautifully. But now just take a look at this closely at the passive action and inaction. If we contrast them, it will give us another view of what's happening at the levels of Sushuptipada to Jivan Mukta. And that's basically what we're talking about, that a shift from becoming aware of your deep sleep state and seeing all the seeds there for everything in the dreaming and waking. It's not the way people usually look at it, but everything comes from internal outward, from the outside, from the inside out. And at the same time, even the outside is a part of the inside because of the connections. You lose the connections, then you only feel that there's one state, your waking state, and there's only one world, the physical world. And you're not even finding other worlds that are populated in physical space with beings on it that you can communicate with. So the whole thing gets very much shrunken down to a lesser ability of intelligence. Stumbling crazily through samsara is how that's described in Tibetan Buddhism. So if you've lost all your capacity to go inward, where peace is. I mean, that was also said here to us, that they just rest in an ineffable peace. Remember, vilapya shantim, parama bhajasvam, is how Shankara puts it. They both get eternal peace and they get this unalloyed bliss when they're there. And that probably that alone could just wipe everything else away. It's not like it becomes a void, like some people think. It's everything just stays the same. It's as if the name and form got stripped out of it and the essence is only there. Like seeing wax figures at a wax museum, but there's a light behind them that's lighting them up so you can see them better. See, so take this wax figurines away and the light's still there. Put them back, the light's still there. So that kind of seeing of oneness is extremely subtle. I don't think there's anything more subtle than that. And you'd have to go to a seer of non-dualism to begin to comprehend that. And what to speak of attain it. So that's why we're looking at this from all sides now, as the expression says. So here we see, if we go to this chart momentarily, that there's these 2 limbs of action and inaction. Call them Raja Yoga and Karma Yoga. You can also see that this bird, which is our Hawaiian bird, the koa e ula, a very interesting creature in that it never sets foot on ground. Sort of like the Homa bird in Sri Ramakrishna's stories. It lays its egg in the air and it never hitches ground. It hatches before in midair and flies back to its mother, describing the ancient seer. Well, this bird is helping us describe the fourfold yoga. Basically, the wings are bhakti and jnanam, devotion and wisdom. Tail feathers is meditation, as Holy Mother said, because that's what guides through the air. And then the head, the body, is karma yoga, an action. So this bird makes its nests in cliffs that are straight up cliffs. Nobody could scale them and find these eggs. So it never touches ground. It's a very good bird to use in metaphorical fashion for talking about the four limbs of yoga. And there's another chart that looks similar to this that goes closer into bhakti and jnanam, because devotion and wisdom also are often pitted against each other when they shouldn't be. They should be joined like the two wings of a bird, so the bird can get off the ground. But here, in accordance with non-duality, let's look at, well, there you can see quickly as a matter of mention, because I didn't bring that chart. I brought you the 7 stages of yoga, but there's the 8 limbs of Patanjali's yoga. So yoga, yogic yoga, and Vedantic yoga is what we've been showing here side by side. And as I said at the beginning of the class, you can see the yamas and niyamas and asana and breathing tend more toward a real practice that the body, mind can get into, hopefully with the prana engaged, and then the psychic prana, because the psychic prana gets engaged, then your thoughts become more important. Your mind becomes the locale. And as you're coming up to dissolve the mind into the great mind, you have these pranas there at your beck and call to do so. Just like you dissolve dreams tonight. You're using a prana to do that. And you're using another prana to make them breathe, that is to bring them into view again. So this is all done naturally by your own consciousness, your own awareness, as it appears at different levels, whether you're calling them stages or states of consciousness or limbs of yoga. That's what's happening, and you're the operator of this, unbeknownst to you, unbeknownst to most people. They're rather going to give that power away, aren't they? Either it doesn't exist, or we're all alone here in this universe, and we don't have any eternal companions, or it's all nonsense. I'm just a materialist living in a material world and such kinds of thoughts. So that is a kind of introduction to the fact that I wanted to just show you the 8 limbs of Raja Yoga here. The limbs that we would be associating with Akshi are right there. Pretty much concentration, meditation, and non-dual abidance. Because what did Gaudapada say here? That this is Atman is like intense concentration without end, but free of conceptualization. So there's that concentration that maybe is only inferred here. When you've mastered the objects with pratyahara, then you can concentrate. It's a magical moment. And actually, it can make all levels of your life. Waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, yes. But people aren't thinking that way. They're thinking of action and inaction and so forth. That is basically waking and sleep. How to get my rest. How to be more effective as I act in my body, with my senses. How to get things that pleasure me. How to avoid things that pain me. And all of those things. So if you reach concentration, you can get all those things. But the special kind of concentration that we call dharma, and that the Akshi Upanishad here is calling everything from svapna to sushuptipada to jivan mukta, is where concentration is the way Gaudapada describes it there. Intense concentration, but no conceptualization left in it. In other words, it's free of innate impulses. That was Sloka 37. And free of all limiting adjuncts. You're at the 6th stage called Turiya. So I wanted to show that quickly. It's not where I'm going though. I want to show you these points of Raja Yoga here, the yoga of inaction. So basically, in Patanjali's mind, it's study and practice of the upper 4 limbs of yoga. So basically there is pretty much what I just said. You've got Pratya, Dharana, Dhyan, and Samadhi is where Raja Yoga is focusing you. It's striving towards dissolving the mind's vibrations. Well, shall we go back to dissolving the mind stream chart and look at how that's done again? So this is a conscious act engaged in by people who want to ripen the ego, purify their thinking process, and hone their intelligence, and turn the mind away from dualities, down to karna right there. You might say, well, boy, I'm going to start this great path called dissolving the mind stream. But if you're seeking, you're already doing that. It's just that they bring it out in different ways to show you what you're doing or what you've accomplished already. It's like I said, looking back is now what the Avadut's doing when he thinks, I don't even know of 3 states of awareness anymore, 4th state of consciousness. He has to look back to remember how he dissolved those, because he just returned to a natural state of awareness that those things never existed in the first place. Some teacher came along and helped me understand that. When I learned that, I got over it. And, everything dissolved, including the prana. And now I'm just resting like a hawk in its nest. Everything quiet. And then go on to describe what that's like. Liberated and alive, beyond all knots. We'll look at that in a minute. And that's just prior to the 7th state of yoga. So striving towards dissolving the mind's vibrations, part of the Raja Yoga system. Performing all actions in a meditative state so as to avoid karma. So do all things in sattva, at least, better in wisdom, Krishna says. But don't do them in restlessness and laziness. You should be able to master those gunas and at least have sattva when you act, because that'll be best for you and for everyone. Recitation of the mantra to merge the mind into a non-dual state. So we know that the Father of Yoga mentioned mantra maybe twice in the Yoga Sutras, and mentioned Ishvara maybe twice. And so that's an important soul and an important practice to him, mantra, that he would include it in the 8 limbs of yoga and the sutras around it. So you can see here Raja Yoga is involved in that. And then devotion to the path of meditation to bring enlightenment to all beings. And so that's where your compassion really turns to love, as Viva Kananda liked to say. In Vedantists, we're not that attached to compassion. We like love better, because love just sees the same in all, and then it wants to help all, not just one person and not another, or someone rich and not someone poor, or it's just not particular that way. It wants to help all equally. So that would be what meditation is to a Swami Vivekananda, say, or to a Gaudapada, and so forth. Since they have culminated that process in samadhi, that makes a big difference in the way they act and why they do things and how effective they are in doing those things, whereas others maybe not that effective. And they don't risk falling back in that kind of action, like, say, altruists can do. So that's just a quick study in terms of inaction, what we're talking about here, that's being described in the Jivan Mukta level of the 6th stage of the Akshi Upanishad yoga. Here's Swami Vivekananda's quote: "If you have known the Atman as the one existence and that nothing else exists, for whom, for what desire do you trouble yourself? Through Maya, all this doing of good, etc., came into my brain. Now they are leaving me. I get more and more convinced that there is no other object in work except purification of the soul, to make it fit for knowledge. This world with its good and evil will go on in various forms. Only the evil and good will take new seats, new names. Now my soul is hankering after peace and rest eternal, undisturbed." So he's describing a state he's returning to, which we have looked at very closely here, in which these slokas in the Akshi Upanishad are been talking about. I don't want to trouble myself with the world anymore. You see, I'm becoming extremely exhausted being concerned for the world. I don't want to attend on outer things anymore. I want to be indrawn. I want to be a voice without a form. I just wrote a God blog on that. I want to be a voice without a form. And so I'm just echoing back some of the slokas here of the sixth stage. That's beautiful. When we think of Swami Vivekananda, of course, we like to also sing about him at the level that is consummate, commiserate with his realizations. Yeah. Vimoksham svat Vivekananda te prabhati pranjali. In this stotram of 13 verses, the 10th verse says, O Vivekananda, your message, transmitted from the platform of non-duality, is for the realization of the soul and for the good of the world. By reinterpreting and coalescing the four yogas and making them accessible and understandable to humanity, you have destroyed the foundations of ignorance in this age and ushered in a new era. In this auspicious dawn of illumination, O Vivekananda, we offer you our complete salutations. Sang just a few days before his birthday, next week. So at the last verse it says, to all those who would attain true freedom, we encourage the chanting of this hymn, composed in a sacred Himalayan mountain retreat. Devoted recitation of these verses on Swami Vivekananda imbues one with physical vigor, mental strength, and spiritual power, and increases discrimination and detachment. In this brilliant dawn of collective awakening of all beings to higher truth, we offer Narendranath, the leader of our souls, our eternal salutations. So, beautiful ways in which to sing about the four yogas and the harbinger of the resurrection of them in this day and age. And he's what he called the new religion of his age, is to become aware of the four yogas. I would say more specifically that then just a physical yoga alone, I'm not going to do it. Just a yoga that proceeds on some breathing exercises, not going to do it. Some yoga that has to do with food faddism alone, these are all things he criticized. The four yogas are basically the yoga of your devotion to God and how to increase it, how to selflessly serve God and all human beings. Those are Bhakti yogas and Karma yoga, unlike on this bird. And then the devotion of Jnanam, the yoga of Jnanam, or devotion to Jnanam is good, which is, of course, pursuing this wisdom that leads to these non-dual states. And then Raja Yoga itself, which we just looked into, where meditation, will play an important part in digesting this wisdom by the auspice of one of the pranas, right? So how that digests wisdom and refines it. So this is really all I wanted to show about this chart. You can put it across the board with Karma Yoga, which is, you can look back on classes we've given in the past and find this chart several times in several series is looked at. The yoga of action and inaction. And so we looked at specifically the inaction part of it to help flesh out our understanding of what Jivan Mukta state is and how these beings have gotten beyond ordinary actions, probably how they've even gotten beyond good actions. As he says here, good and bad just change their seats. So he's not going to just be putting all his energy into good that turns to evil and back again. He's going to go to a transcendent level and in a selfless way show how to live and act in inaction. Krishna explains that in the Gita too, and probably one of the hardest of the Gita slokas to understand. That one who knows that inaction is in action and action is in inaction. That one truly knows. It's even hard to say without twisting the tongue. So these two yogas side by side are very interesting, but we looked at it here to show how we can get a deeper grasp upon the yoga of inaction. Now, there's another couple teachings here in these slokas. Again, I'm talking about 38, 39, 37, 38, and 39 in the Akshi Upanishad, where in 39 he says, beyond knots, with all doubt vanquished, liberated in life, that's Jivan Mukta, devoid of imaginations, though extinguished yet, though unextinguished yet extinguished, he is like a painted flame. So getting a little bit more poetic there with some metaphors thrown in. But the part I wanted to show and talk about was this idea of being beyond knots. So in this chart here, if we say the word knots, we think of everything to ropes. But if you put it in the context of psychology, you might then go ahead and think about it as knots in the mind, like stepping on a hose or knotting up a hose. The water just can't get through anymore. And the mind gets like that. That's where its doubts, its confusions, its errors, like we were saying earlier, that even doing actions in restlessness and slothfulness are going to be like those knots. You just won't let any higher intelligence through, basically. So in that way, if we look at this chart, we can see that the word in Sanskrit, and they've thought about this for long periods of time, is Granti. So Grantis, complex knots congealing in one's body and energy, as well as in the emotional, mental, psychic, and spiritual bodies, impede the easy flow of spiritual force, which otherwise keeps the aspiring human being strong, fit, and healthy for purposes of living a dharmic life. Well, don't just take my word for it. Let's look at what Shankara says. Samadhina anena samastavasana grantir vinasha akila karma nashaha. One out of his beautiful Vivekachudamani scripture in Sanskrit translates as, destroy all the knots in your being caused by desire-based actions, internal and external, through the practice of the attainment of samadhi. One of the kickers there, and one of the knots inside of a knot, would be, I don't know about my internal actions. I only know about my external actions. So if you put a spotlight on that one mention in that sutra, in that sloka, and you see that, what's he talking about? Internal actions. Well, it's the mind, isn't it? Your thoughts are active, your mind's active. That's thought is father to the deed kind of thinking, which somebody in the West must have thought of if they coined a phrase like that. Thought is father to the deed. So then, in that light then, these knots, And sometimes I describe them as from the inside out, like here. Know about your external and internal knots, and try and attain samadhi. Get beyond them and attain samadhi. So sometimes we go from outside in, sometimes we go from inside out. But basically, the image there is about a dam, and so there's one great block in the river. The river would be your nadis, where this udana prana, if you might say, wants to flow inward, and it's coming up against a definite dam in that flow of prana, which later will become the flow of Shakti under her auspice. But it's like you're standing there looking upriver, and there she is, but you can't get to her because your water is dammed up, see, behind this non-mastery of prana and its flow, for instance. By dissolving the mind stream has really powerful results to it that are wholly beneficial to you. And you won't just be getting some bliss from your dreams then, you'll be having bliss all the time. And that would entail then breaking through this dam and letting the water just flow. Probably up to this time there's a fish ladder over here, and a few souls are getting through, if they can find it. Because my dad used to take me to all the big dams in Oregon when they were first made, Grand Coulee and some of those, and we'd see the fish ladder, how some of the fish would find it and get through. So maybe that was 60 years ago, but it was probably already forming in my mind that someday I would do a chart and use this as an analogy for how things get dammed up by Grantis in Sanskrit. So we know the physical ones. This isn't rocket science. There they are, the knots in your life force. The knots in your, yes, I think I start in your body right here. Would be the start there. Circulatory interference, recurring disease, failure of your bodily organs, constriction of your muscles, and premature decay. All some of the things that are mentioned by some of these great realized souls who also had an eye out for your physical health. Like, for instance, I can name two, Lord Vashishta and Lord Patanjali, like bookends at either end of 5 or 6 millennia that we know of in this history, back to the Rig Veda, forward to the present time. So they also had a knowledge that you had blocks in your body, but unlike doctors and physicians and other people, they knew that these blocks were not caused by the body. They were caused by your inner body, your mind. They actually caused these. And one of those diseases was called rebirth. They were even thinking in that direction. That was one of the teachings of Lord Vashishta, that the first disease is rebirth. Second disease is being reborn without discrimination. See, so these are two very bright and strong keys, clues to get about taking on a body if you're a Jivan Mukta, you see. So you'll have to have mastered that, and probably be good for you to know in your students and in people in general what the knots are and what are happening. So this isn't just coming back to the body to focus on it like Hatha Yoga does. It's coming back to the body to show you that these things that you're suffering have their cause inside of you, and you can remove them. It's like a yogic immune system. And a lot of people would be, if they were availed of that, like the yogis, they wouldn't be getting sick very often. And when they did get sick, they'd say, well, my body has caught the sickness, but my mind knows how to get rid of it, because that's where it all started, back in the mind, in my thinking process. My thinking is external and internal, isn't it? So if the seers are giving me that clue, I should go back and remove these outer by my inner powers. Well, I'm going to have my prana into control, we said, so here's the next level. Knots in the life force, a convenient English word to use for prana. Although, remember the psychic prana teaching of it now that we've had it. So knots in the life force are dull thoughts. And when you do act in tamas or rajas, it's impulsive, you see. Like say you've got a glass of water there and you're holding on to it, and you take your hand away quickly and impulsively, and you catch the lip of the glass and it spills water all over you, you see. So you weren't mindful of taking your hand off the glass and taking it away. You were distracted. So you do things like this. And so your prana is spiking, or it's dull, see. And therefore you're doing things in mindlessness instead of, we know the teaching, mindfulness in Buddhism today. So dull thoughts and impulsive actions, you probably call those the fault of Rajas and Tamas, and they will give rise to these problems in the body. Fluctuation of energy, that's a real main cause for your organs not functioning properly. So, for instance, I'd say your lungs are most important of all the organs in your body, because thereby you can get the prana going, which can heal all the other organs. You want to breathe, because a lot of the diseases that come in the body are because you're not breathing. And it's not just that if you breathe, you'll understand basically, the spiritual teachings. My brain will get more oxygen, therefore I'll have more intelligence. You haven't even gotten that far yet. You really want to have your lungs functioning so that it acts as a yogic immune system to these diseases, which don't need to be there. And you succumb to them and they get in, and they pretty much bring about premature decay. I mean, you can hold them all your life. I'm going down the list here rather quickly, but unsteadiness of nerves is, in yoga, it's called shvasha prashvashaha. And it gives you anga mejayatva. You don't breathe right, and your limbs are angular. You don't know where to put them. You're awkward, and you don't have grace. You don't have fearlessness. You don't have any of these things. And the body seems like an alien pace to you. Sound kind of familiar when your location is just the body? So these grantis around that are in the nerves. And if you find them in the physical nerves, then you'll find out maybe there's something called nadis, which are spiritual nerves. Those are inside your mind. And you can't see those or dissect those. And prana is running along them in the form of psychic prana. So that, if you get a hold of that, can heal that. Most people are going from, if I get a hold of this, I can heal this. That's not the case in most all cases. It's that you get a hold of the psychic prana first, it informs the physical prana. Physical prana flows to the organs, and I'm all well and good down here on earth, I can tell you. I'm just fine. I haven't even got a cold for 10 years, kind of thing, you see. And viruses, what's that to me? I have a yogic immune system. And then, of course, the final knot there would be uneven breathing, which I've already made the connection to because of the unsteadiness of the nerves. You can steady the nerves by breathing. You can steady your posture by breathing. That's in the Yoga Sutras even, because Patanjali doesn't mention Hatha Yoga in his Yoga Sutras, but he does mention pranayama a couple times. And he allocates it most to pratyahara. If you can have this steadiness of posture, that can help you with your pratyahara. It's like, if I can still this body, I can still my mind from objects. So he does make that connection. And in that way, there is a way to go from the finite to the infinite. But by smoothing out all knots. Later it will become by dissolving all vrittis, you see. But right now it's physical knots you're talking about, in physical nerves. Pretty soon it's vrittis, or vibrations, in your psychic nerves, or your mental nerves. So we've gone through 10 right there. These are all sets of 5s. And around this word Granti, which comes from what again? Verse 39 in the Akshi Upanishad. By the way, there are 48 verses, so we're 9 verses away from concluding next week. So it says here, beyond knots, all doubt vanquished, liberated in life, devoid of imaginations. like a painted flame, he resides. So that's where we're coming from. So let's look at the knots as they go further in towards the knots of the heart. Now when we say knots of the heart here, we mean emotional heart. It's hard to talk about heart in Vedanta because that's Atman to us. That's this fourth chakra. And so the emotional is really more a part of the mind, isn't it, in Vedanta? It's not a part of your heart. And, senses fall victim to it. But emotional knots are there in the mind. So again, if you can heal it from the mind, the emotions will become stable. You won't be Kshobha anymore. You'll be Akshobha. And you won't have this problem with emotions. You'll be non-emotional, which is a good thing, I'd like to say. To get away from emotionalism means you can get some balance, like with the breath and with the posture, and you can see things as they truly are. From a witness standpoint. It's very crucial to this day and age to the people in these Western countries right now, probably people across the planet, very important to them to be able to have that non-emotional state, which characterized by like Zen Buddhism, say. And of course the Swamis in the Ramakrishna order we've met, they're just so steady and even-minded all the time. When an elephant gets into a village lake, it's a riot of waves. I've seen that happen in India. But when an elephant gets into an ocean, nothing happens. So your consciousness has to be like an ocean, so that the elephant of pain and disease and problems of the world and emotions and politics and business and all the things that you'd probably be better keeping out of the picture when they do get in, doesn't have any effect on your consciousness whatsoever, like an elephant getting in an ocean. To be that vast and impervious, to that kind of influence is a high ideal. So, what are some of the knots of the heart? Love-related insecurities. So, people are having relationships not well considered, coming together, falling apart all the time. Emotional confusion, which we've just talked about. Dispositional discord. So this reminds me of the four moods. You have to have a mood of good food. You have to have a mood of good actions and so forth. You have the mood of being the Atman, and you have to have the mood of good moods. Samprasad, they call it. Adhyatma prasad and samprasad and anaprasad and so forth. So the mood around a thing is very important. And that is of the mind again, your mood. The mind dictates the mood, whether I'm sour or sweet, whether I'm happy or not, and so forth. So they master these four moods. And that really is a teaching that can go side by side with that dispositional discord. Just probably because love-related insecurities come up, because the man and woman you're with have bad moods all the time. So you get tired of it, so you leave. You don't know how to help them. That would be, of course, a whole other thing. But and neither do your doctors or your psychologists know how to help them. They don't. They just hope and throw things at them. Medicines, some advice. But basically what you've got here is somebody who knows where this is coming from and how can help you settle down. One of my favorite two-word mantras, settle down. And breathe evenly, sit quietly, reflect, and eventually get to the sixth stage of yoga, at least, where you're just jivan mukta, described in these verses. Sentimental obsessions, that's a big problem. Sentimentalism, mystery mongering, and those kinds of things are rampant in today's mind, especially when they're focused on television instead of God vision, as my teacher used to say. Passion-based agitation, so you experience something, you're passionate about it, it gets taken away from you, or you lose it somehow, and you get very agitated about it, and you react. Along with sentimentalism and emotionalism, the teaching of Akshobha, being beyond them, comes this teaching of being non-reactive. That's very strong in Patanjali's yoga. It's very strong in Advaita yoga too. If you remember some of the teachings around asamvedana, for instance, from Lord Vashishta, how just non-receptivity to anything that disturbs your peace and harmony is not allowed, disallowed. There might as well be a huge barrier with a sign on it between you and anything that's going to mar your peace of mind that keeps it out. And that could be called non-sentimentality and non-reactivity. See, whatever happens, happens. See. Oh, I went and committed murder. Oh, that's too bad. What are you going to do about it? See, it's not, oh, freak out, you see, as if people aren't dying every minute by the thousands. So basically, get a grip, settle down, don't react to anything, be a witness of everything that happens because you know it's the changing Maya and you're the unchanging Atman. Maybe I should stop there and end the class, and that's your final advice for today. But one other here in the knots of the heart is habitual sensual gratification. And of course that's a pratyahara problem. You see, that's why after you can sit and breathe, the next thing you do is try and attain pratyahara in yoga. It probably isn't a problem in the Akshi Upanishad 7 stages, because the first one means I got over transmigration already. So you probably did your pratyahara a long time ago. And this is the beauty of putting together the Raja Yoga with Akshi Yoga. I'm calling it Akshitam Yoga now. But basically it's the beauty of it because you can see that that Patanjali's yoga cuts lower, starts lower and goes high, but then Akshi starts high and goes high. So in that way, it's very compassionate of Patanjali why yoga is still relatively known in the world, along with Vedanta, whereas a lot of the other darshanas of India are just totally forgotten, even by most Hindus nowadays. There's 6 darshanas, main ones, that are orthodox. Yoga and Vedanta happen to survive fairly well. So Patanjali has his survive by the fact that he's taking into consideration that you can work from the ground up. It's very rare to be able to do that effectively. You can't do it with conventional life and people. Going from the finite to the infinite will not happen because they don't believe in an infinite. They believe only in the finite. That's why you can't go from the finite to the infinite. Nobody is there to tell you what the infinite is, like Gaudapada and Surya Narayan and Swami Vivekananda. So you have nowhere to go but back to the finite. But here with Patanjali's yoga, which we're putting side by side with Akshitam Yoga, basically is that you can take these tattvas and refine them and move through them and not get attached to them, let them go, and all the knots involved with them, you can iron them out. You can get that prana flowing through that hose again. You might be able to even squirt others with it. Have some fun along the way. Help others along the way, Holy Mother said. I can say more about the knots of the heart because it's a big one for people, but knots of the mind are really the main thing about all 4 of these. If those weren't there, the rest wouldn't be there. Or if any of the rest were there, they could be overcome quickly. Because we've seen illumined people have diseases and get over them, transcend them. Sri Ramakrishna with his throat cancer, and so forth. So it's not like these things don't come to the aging body or to consciousness that has to associate with money and power and people and so forth. So basically, the knots of the mind, you can pretty much smooth those out and watch your life become perfect. Everything in balance again. That's yoga, right? Equilibrium. Equilibrium is yoga, one of the sutras. So there it is, starting with subtle spiritual inabilities. if we could attain some spiritual qualities, not just virtues, which are fine enough, but some actual spiritual abilities, like pratyahara, being able to withdraw our mind from objects, being non-emotional. I mean, these probably should have already been had, and they are possessed by souls who come perfect into the body already. We were just singing about one of them, right? We offer to Narendranath, the perfect leader of souls, the perfect man, our eternal salutation. So, wow, we found somebody who was representing the highest ideal. He had to come from another country and show himself to us, but that's why we revere him and praise him, because his master, who was an avatar, called him a Nitya Siddha, a perfected being. So the perfect man has come amongst us in these stotrams. So if you see a man like that and can acquire even a few of his traits, maybe he can transmit them to you. And if you're not there at the same time he's in the body, you can meditate on him, because he's still there watching us for some hundreds of years from his subtle body. Well, we'd have to know what the subtle body was and explain it to you, to show you where Swami Vivekananda is right now. He's a voice without a form. So what he's going to be doing for you when you meditate upon him, he says, I may get beyond the body soon, and it'll be a very beautiful thing, but I will not stop incarnating until I've helped every soul get illumination. So that's a pretty vast and firm avowal, isn't it? So he's there for you to meditate on. And I'm saying this a few days before his birthday so that all of us can begin thinking about him and ask him, show us how to heal our minds, because all the rest of these knots will smooth out if we can. Like philosophical quandaries, they're not anybody I can think of, including Sri Ramakrishna, that could solve your philosophical quandaries like Swamiji can. So, otherwise, what are you thinking? Father of Yoga is warning about the seventh antaryaya, the seventh vikshepa, Bhranti darshana. You have Bhranti, delusion, around philosophical matters, like my watch keeps the only right time, my religion's the only right religion, all other religions are bad. That's Bhranti darshana, plain and simple. Or, I'm going to go to war, and my monotheistic God is going to war against your monotheistic God, and we're going to commit violence against each other and accrue karma and think we won or think we lost. As Krishna says in the Gita, those who think they're killing and those who think they're being killed, neither of them know the truth. Wrongity, wrong, wrong. Well, don't get me into that one because we'll use the rest of the time in the class on that alone, but go on with Natsi's ego-based fears and doubts. Well, where else will they be based, really? The ego is fearing not receiving what it likes to get from the mind and the intelligence and the thoughts, because usually it's control of the antakarana, the fourfold mind. Ego is there, driving it like a chariot. And doubts too. We had recently our satsang last Saturday was a question about doubt and how to deal with it. And I answered how doubt could be something helpful, that if you consider it a challenge. Like that something, if doubt brings up something in you, isn't that a good thing? That makes you aware of it and you can deal with it. So you should always be like our founder, Lex Hickson, for instance, always positive about everything. It was amazing to see him in the body. Intellectual uncertainties and mental complexes. Yeah, 10 minutes, there's no way I'm going to get to mental complexes, which is about samskars. Maybe next week we could use it, but we may need time to deal with the last 8 or 9 slokas to finish this, but that's a big one. You're not thinking psychotherapy, Western style, when you're talking about that. Not in these climes and times. You're talking about yoga psychology from India, like this 8-limb yoga we were looking at. So basically that is called samskara. It's like we have words like lokas and akashas for the realms within us. And other traditions might just call them heaven. But we have a whole series of gradated lokas with different kinds of beings occupying them, which are all inside of the great Atman, the great self, and which the mind is turning into form and conceptualizing about and creating knots around too. If you want to find them and smooth them out, then all of life will be bliss. Your waking, your dreaming, your deep sleep state will all be dissolved into Turiya. That's what it's like to live in Brahman, is to have that kind of state that's beyond resistance and non-resistance. Or how did he put it here? It's unextinguished, yet it's extinguished. So they're trying to describe to us again the Jivan Mukti state of mind. The highest level of the Pure Lands of Buddhism is Bodhisattvahood. That would also be something to look at. So samskara, see, don't confuse the word with samsara, which is another word for Maya, rounds of birth and death and ignorance, happening in the 3 worlds, the lower 3 chakras, for instance, where there's lots of knots in the Grantis. Lots of Grantis in the nadis. See there. People are even born with them. If we can look at the samskara charts a little next week, we'll try, if we think we can finish it in time. I brought them because that's a very interesting look at something people don't usually see about themselves. That actions out here, diseases out here, food eaten out here, thoughts had acted upon out here, are usually based in their mind samskaras, their mental impressions. They're running along those grooves when they're born. And conditionings further attenuate them. You take these samskaras, you say to the world, here I am, here's me, here's how the channels I run along. And they say, oh, here, take some of this and take some of that and some more of that. And we'll throw that all in, with your samskaras and attenuate them further, you see, exacerbate them further. And so pretty soon you're not getting rid of your conditionings at all, so you can start with a clean slate or reach a Jivan Mukta state. You're just adding more gloom on gloom, getting farther and farther away from your true self, which you came here to realize. And now, what's the possibility of that with all these conditionings of your mind? So that's the realm of samskara that we're not looking at today. It's a pretty across-the-board word used in India today, but it's really sometimes limited to the twice-born and to people who have reached a higher caste and so forth. But when you look at samskaras in yoga, you have to look at them as some very important knots or very important channels through which people run, because there's not just negative samskaras, there's positive samskaras, and there's also mixed samskaras. So that's what these charts get into. Maybe we can look at it next week a little. Finally on this chart is psychic disturbances. So those are a lot of what caused these fears that are in the mind. They have no explanation for things that are happening to them that seem to be coming out of nowhere. And a lot of that gives rise to superstition, even in religion, and false beliefs, Granti darshana, that they then start believing in because they've had experience of it, but this experience was based upon psychic disturbances, not on psychic prana and its realization. So if your psychic prana is warped, then won't the experiences that the psychic prana bring you in your mind also be warped? So the import of having the prana flowing without knots, evenly, not spiking, not dipping, ekagra, flatlined, or nirodha, completely dissolved. So I hope that this has been a good run through knots, which are mentioned right there, Grantis, you can see in Sloka 39, at the sixth stage of Akshitam Yoga, we're calling it here. Beyond knots, beyond all doubts, all of them vanished. And there's the Jivan Mukta sitting perfectly still, established forever in the non-dual Brahman. And may that also be the case for all of us. So there on the right-hand side of the chart, as we close out here now, you can see kind of the human form with these knots. Anagrantis at the body level, pranagrantis at the vital level, hridaya at the human emotional heart level, and managrantis at the mind level. It's a great study, and good to get beyond them, as this fortunate Samkriti is hearing about from the sun god, Surya Narayan. So there then we have reached to the seventh state of Akshitam Yoga, or the Akshi Upanishad, 7 stages of yoga. And we will take up those, some 6, 7 maybe slokas, next week in our final class of the Akshi Upanishad. And that will also enable us to put the whole Akshi Upanishad on the YouTube and on our site sometime. And people can always be looking at it in its full and best form. So here then, with that accomplished and a lot of ground covered along this 7 stages, let's end with our Sanskrit sloka. Om Tatsnayo, Om Tatsnayo Ravrini Mahe, Gatung Yagyaya, Gatung Ye Nupataye, Daivi Swastarastu Naha, Swastir Manusebhyaha, Urdhvam Jigatu Bhesajam, Sangno Astu Dipade Sang Chatushpate, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we make a great and humble offering into the great self, the small self into the great self. May we always delight in this offering. May we always revere the Lord and Mother of all sacrifices. May peace and blessings be and become upon the entire human race. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.